Warriors, I am so excited today to bring you a fellow warrior, the fiercest mom I know, Charlotte Laws. Charlotte is with us. We're going to talk for the next however long Charlotte wants to talk, because I could talk to her for hours about everything. We're going to spend time delving into how she created and took down her. I say create it because I really feel like you created this movement, to take down the most hated man on the internet and started something, Charlotte. And if we can get other moms and women and warriors involved, it will snowball and will really, create success. And Charlotte can currently be seen with her daughter, Kayla, on the Netflix true crime docuseries, The Most Hated Man on the Internet. And welcome to the Warriors.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. I want to start with, let's start talking about the docuseries. It's a true crime. Let's start with that. And then we're going to talk about whatever else you want to talk about. I have a million questions for you. So it's currently airing on Netflix, The Most Hated Man on the Internet. This sucked your daughter, your family, beginning in 2012, correct?
Right.
Now tell
January
us
of 2012.
Now I want to remind all the warriors. So this is a decade ago, and then we're going to move into today. Tell us exactly what happened.
Well, my daughter had taken some pictures in her room, and one of them was topless. And because she wanted to save them, she sent them to her computer because her phone got full, and saved them in her email. And she got hacked after that. And the topless picture was put on the most notorious revenge porn website called Is Anyone Up, along with her name, her city, and her social media link. And she had no intention. She would have never sent that topless picture to anyone. So she was at her waitress job when one of her friends called and told her that she was on the site. The conversation started, I'm so sorry, Kayla. And Kayla was just freaked out, devastated, felt violated, exposed, humiliated, and didn't know what to do. And she called me, and I had never heard of revenge porn. And I got on the computer and started looking at the website, seeing the owner of the site, which was Hunter Moore. And that's kind of how it got started. And I realized I had to get this picture down. My daughter was like in tears. She was in no way had the ability to fight for herself. And I have since learned that victims very seldom can fight for themselves. They really need somebody to take the lead and help them, because they're just, they put the knife in where they blame themselves. They feel, just so disgusted and freaked out. And they just want to 50% of these victims want to kill themselves. They think about suicide. 93% are severely emotionally distressed. So it's very devastating for the victims of non-consensual pornography or image-based sexual abuse or revenge porn, whatever you want to call it.
Well, as you pointed out to me when you were on my radio program, revenge porn, that's how the public knows it. That's how it's always been referred. That's out there. So yes, we call it revenge porn. And I've been posting revenge porn equals, image-based sexual abuse equals, we use both terms because let's face it, that's what the public knows it as, revenge porn.
Yeah.
So
and it's hard too, because image-based sexual abuse is such a long term. It's hard to even get a reporter to write about it. We need to learn it as IBSA or, have some kind of abbreviation so that the public can learn that, because it's such a long term that, people don't want to put it in print. You have a certain number of words in an article. And so it's easier just to put revenge porn in that article.
Absolutely. We're trying with the IPSA, the IBSA, but that also you have to put is image-based, because they just don't know, but we're working on that. But you see, Kayla was so lucky, as you pointed out, Charlotte, because she had you and she went to you, because most of these, young women or young men or kids these days, and we'll get into that a little bit later on, embarrassed, shut down, internalized, as you pointed out, they do not share with parents. And that's something at the Warriors, we want to open it up, parents. And this is in no way blaming anybody. This is, open it up that everybody has to communicate. We live, I don't care if it was 2012, 2022, it's a whole new world. And that's why I think right now, you went through this a decade ago, bringing your voice forward, what happened to you and Kayla and your family. is so important, that it's okay, come to your mom, come to your dad, talk about it, but take action. Now, all this happened. I can tell you are a fierce mama, and nobody's going to tangle with you. Now, take us through the process. What is the first thing you did when this happened? Who did you turn to? What happened?
Well, I sent an email to Hunter Moore asking him to remove the content, and he wouldn't remove it. But I knew that because I had already researched him, and I knew that he just laughed at those comments, and that, he didn't remove content. I called 9 attorneys up front. They all threw up their hands. They said they didn't know anything about this, and it was a new area, and just there were no lawyers to advise me. My daughter didn't want me to tell my husband, who was an attorney. So I had to keep this to myself. I wasn't allowed to tell anyone because, she was embarrassed for anybody to know. And so I realized I just had to dig in and figure out what we could do to, what I could do to get the content removed. And I started with the law regarding images and copyright, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And that's what I had asked Hunter to remove it based on the fact that my daughter owned the copyright. And people may not know, but if you take a picture of yourself, you automatically own the copyright. And if you are victimized and say your girlfriend took the picture, then you can ask that person to sign over the copyright to you, and then you do own the copyright. And usually copyright law is punished civilly, not criminally, unfortunately. But if a person does sue the person who puts their image up, you can get $250,000 per photo. So that's kind of an avenue, at least civilly, for victims. But that didn't help us because he refused to remove them. He wasn't afraid of civil suits because he had no assets. And so I had to find other ways to try to get to him. And I started out by calling everybody I could think of associated with him, from his publicist, his attorney, some of his advertisers. I even tried to get in touch with his mom.
I was just going to say, what about his mom? Shame him. Yeah.
And I found her former workplace. Unfortunately, she didn't work there anymore, but I talked to all of her associates, and they were like, huddled around the phone going, oh my God, tell us more about this website. So it was like, all this information was out there to her colleagues. And I knew that it got back to the family because Hunter posted on Twitter, someone just called my mom's former workplace, ha, ha, ha. So I knew it got all the way back, that information, but none of that worked. And so in the meantime, my daughter saw that one of her friends was also on the site. And so she called her friend, and the friend said she was hacked. She was newly married. She had given the picture to her husband, but no one else. And so I thought to myself, this one website, I know 2 people on it, and they were both hacked. So maybe there's a hacking scheme. And so I thought, because hacking is illegal, that would be a way to, quote, get the site down, get my daughter's picture down. And so what I did is I started reaching out to victims on the site. And I ended up contacting 40 people, but it was very hard because I couldn't use electronics. I didn't want to use email or social media. I was afraid the hacker might be on there. So everything had to be done by the phone. And so it was very tedious because sometimes I'd only have like their last name, their first name and last name, and I'd have their city. And then I'd have to call people with the same last name and say, are you related to this person? Could you have her call me? So it was very roundabout. And after I got through with my little study of 40 people, I found out that 40% of them had been hacked. So I gathered all this information. I had their phone numbers and their emails, and I could even tell that it was the same hacker in some situations, because the same hacker as my daughter, because this guy who was hacking left a fake email behind on social media. And it was the same email on my daughter's account as it was on some of the other accounts. And so, and then my daughter and I went to LAPD, the police department, who were doing the victim blaming. And we met with this middle-aged female detective. And she said to my daughter, why would you take a picture like this if you didn't want it on the internet? And so I told her she was victim blaming. I said that if my daughter had taken a picture with a Polaroid, and, stuck it in her, bedside table drawer, and someone had broken in and stolen the picture, would you arrest the crime, or would you tell her it was her fault for taking the picture and putting it in her drawer? And so she just sighed and said she'd go to get forms. And I told my daughter, we'll call the FBI when we get
Good
home.
for you.
And so that's what I did. I called the FBI, and the FBI initially didn't want to take the case. They said, just file a report online. And I said to them, oh, I see. You help Scarlett Johansson when she gets hacked, but you don't help the average person.
Good for you.
And she had just been hacked recently as well. And so the guy on the operator just sighed and said, let me transfer you to a detective. And then I was told there'd be 3 agents coming to the house later in the month. And so that's what eventually happened. Eventually, the FBI came to the house, and I was able to, and they originally said they didn't think they'd take the case, because they said they only take cases that involved large losses of money, and the victims hadn't lost a lot of money. And they also said to me that even if we do take the case, it takes us over a year to investigate. So there was a lot of bad news at first. And, but luckily they did take the case, and I had like 12 inches of data that I gave them that first trip, along with other hacked victims.
Well, that probably did it. You did their job for them. Right?
So luckily they started investigating. So I was happy about that. And then in the meantime, I was still trying to get my daughter's picture down. And
So it was still up there the whole time. It was still on the site.
Yeah, I mean, actually, you know what? By the time the FBI was there, I had already gotten her picture down. So that's true.
He just took it down. He just took it down. He took it down.
No, what happened was that I had several conversations with his attorney and named Reza Sina, and I could tell he wasn't taking me seriously. So my daughter allowed me to tell my husband. My husband was like, this is no big deal. It'll just go away if you ignore it. I mean, he had these misconceptions about the internet because he hardly ever went online. And he didn't want to get involved in it initially. But after I started getting the death threats and the computer viruses, and it was just kind of went crazy.
Tell us about that, because I know you had at one point a stalker. But first, I got to back up. I want to ask you something, because I know you also said this on the radio program, and it's kind of been like sitting in my head. So Kayla was hacked. Did him hack into like her friends that were on her site to get to her friends? Because it's such a coincidence. Yeah. So they were hacking into people's accounts and like stealing images from friends and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, he was doing it through Facebook. And so he would basically reach, he would get into one Facebook person's account. He started with his own account. He started hacking his own friends first, which is amazing that he would do that to people he knew. And he was putting their nude pictures online, because some of them called me later when the trial was happening, and they were just horrified that he had done this to them.
That's what I read.
So yeah. So he would, he'd go to them, and then he would go to the friends of the friends and the friends of the friends. And Kayla had 6 friends in common with him. So that's how she ended up getting on the radar. It was just random. It was like whoever's account he could get into, he would rifle through their emails. He'd get into their Facebook, then into their email, and then he would go through and see what he could find. And if he found nude pictures, then he would get paid for them by, Hunter would send him money for the photos. So that's how it worked. So yeah, and he lived, he went to high school a block from the house where Kayla was raised. He was from kind of our neighborhood, where Kayla lived most of her childhood. So the hacker, Charlie Evans. So they definitely had friends in common, and
wow,
so yeah, so that's how it all started. But yeah, it was difficult because I went, when we got it down, I should say, first of all, how we got it down. So I had talked to his attorney. His attorney was kind of like not taking me seriously. Finally, my husband and attorney was pissed off.
Well, stop for a second. I don't mean to interrupt, but like, why wouldn't an attorney take you seriously? The mom whose daughter has, a nude image on some guy's website. Like, why would an attorney treat you like that?
I think it's because he got calls all the time by so many, victims of the website. And I think he just ignored it. But if it's an attorney calling him, I mean, he even said that in the documentary. He took it seriously because it was an attorney calling him. And he, I guess he feared that he would end up in a lawsuit over it. And he just didn't want that hassle. And I think he said in the documentary, he never told me this, but in the documentary, I believe he told Hunter that if you don't take Kayla's picture down, that's the end of me. I'm not your attorney anymore. So I think he gave him an ultimatum, is what I believe. So it wasn't even that easy at that point.
Right.
Now I had, I got her picture down for like a few hours prior to this day, because I got in touch with the president of the company that did his cybersecurity. It was called Black Lotus Communications. And the president was named Jeffrey Lyon. And I talked to him on the phone. I told him about the FBI investigation. I told him that about copyright law and how, and about the hacking. And so he actually he got his team to block Kayla's page. So she disappeared for a little while. But Hunter, being as mean-spirited and nefarious as he is, he went around the block and created a whole new page for Kayla. So we were back to square one. And then I talked to Jeffrey and I said, he made a new page, and Jeffrey said, I know. And he said, I'm going to try to figure out a way to block the photos and not the page. Let me work on it for a day or two. In the meantime is when Kayla gave me the permission to talk to my husband, and he got involved, and he called Hunter's attorney and basically said, if it's not down in 30 minutes, that's it. I'm fed up with this whole thing. I'm going to court. I'm tired of dealing with this. And that's when the picture did come down. But all the other victims were still up there. And
I was just going to say, they're still up there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I had all these relationships with all these people. I would say 50% of the time when I talked to victims, I was the one to tell them they were on the site. They didn't even know. And they were like, because a lot of times I'd be letting people know like just a few hours after they were uploaded or a day after they were uploaded. So they didn't even know. And so I was like a suicide hotline. That's honestly how it fed. It was tears. It was, it was just such trauma. And, it was very, very hard making these calls. I was in tears all the time. It was just painful talking to all these victims. And so that's kind of, how it all started and what was happening. And then I had to figure out a way to get, their pictures down. And I knew it was a cause at this point. I mean, I knew.
I was going to say, there's a real movement. Were any of the other parents, did you talk to did anybody offer up like their parents to help or get involved or assist you, or were you the only one doing it?
There was, I talked to like one or two parents during this period, but they never offered to get involved. So, so there was never any, I just talked to them, like, nothing in deep,
Right.
Nothing deep about it,
Wow.
but just, oh, hi, nice to talk to you. But mostly they didn't tell their families. They didn't want anyone to know.
Right.
And, the whole thing about hacking for Hunter Moore, it wasn't about nude pictures. It was about getting pictures of people who had something to lose, people who were professionals, people who had, were teachers or social workers or executives. It was about, law school. There was one, it was a male student in law school. So it was, so that's what it was about. So they didn't want people to know because they knew they could lose their job, they could lose their career. They felt like their life would be over. And so, so it was very hard. It was, it was not like they were just.
Well, I think, I think he was calling himself a professional life wrecker or life ruiner, or he was putting something out there and saying, ha, 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 to everybody, as you know. So now tell us further along. So what, I will say, and we're going to get into it a little bit later on, your background, I think very well prepared you, right? Juggling many, many hats. I'll leave it at that to do this, because I have to tell you, Charlotte, I don't know anybody else who could do this. I'm really not kidding when I say that, because most people just give up. They might start, right, and be enthusiastic, and at some point they just give up. And dealing with law enforcement, even though I love law enforcement, I'm pro law enforcement, they don't understand the issue, so it gets shut down. FBI, don't understand, too busy, gets shut down. But you were so on this, relentless, that I don't know, you should be commended somehow. We should have you being I don't know, a L'Oreal woman of worth or something. We have to come up with something. We have to get involved in some of that stuff if you want. We'll talk about that. Because I'll tell you, this being, and I can't say it enough, 10 years ago, and now where we're standing today. But let's continue your story with Kayla. So then what happened? How did he finally get shut down?
Well, so what happened was is that he knew there was an FBI investigation, and he was pretty freaked out about this. So his attorney actually had said to me, "We're going to have to take the site down because if there really is an FBI investigation, because that material could be used against you." In the meantime, there was a guy named James McGivney who was, offered him money to buy the site, or not to buy the site, to buy the domain, the isanyoneup.com domain. And so Hunter sold him the domain for, I think, a fairly small amount of money. And so the site came down, even though we were like amazed that it just came down so quickly. I mean, there was no notice. It's not like Hunter said, "Oh, I'm going to take the site down in 3 days," or it just like bam. And so we were really surprised that it happened so quickly. And he got a lot of backlash from his followers when this happened, because they were like, "Oh, you're a sellout, and why'd you do that?" And so anyway, what happened was he then started saying he was going to bring the site back and just put it on a new domain. I think he was going to use huntermore.tv because he already owned that domain. And but he said he was going to make it worse. He was not only going to bring back all the same content, including my daughter's picture, but he was going to include addresses and driving directions on how to get to the victims' houses. And I had his home address for a very long time, and people were calling me because when they wanted to serve legal papers, they didn't know where to serve them. And so I had wanted to post his address, his home address, but the FBI a while back had asked me not to do it, at the beginning, because they said, "We don't want him alerted to the investigation," even though we knew he already knew, because I told his attorney, I told the Black Lotus Communications president. I mean, it was kind of like people around him already knew about the investigation. And so what happened is that I posted on Twitter his home address. And of course, I'd already been getting death threats. I'd already gotten computer viruses, but I got tons of backlash when I did that. I mean, I was like the enemy of Hunter Moore, and he had all these
But
rabid followers.
explain that, because it was his family, right? It was like a cult.
Yeah. It was like a cult, and they called themselves a family, and Hunter was the father and they were the children. And people would post, "I will kill for you, father. Tell me what to do." And Hunter started making direct, attacks against me, saying, "I'm going to go after you, Charlotte Laws. I'm reposting your daughter's picture." I mean, he was making attacks on social media. Eventually, when he talked to a Village Voice reporter, which this is in the documentary as well, he actually said he was going to get a gun and kill the person who started the FBI investigation, which is me. And then he also said he was going to burn down the Village Voice. So he was trying to get them not to write an article about the FBI, because he was trying to keep that under wraps. He didn't want the public to know. I was saying that he was hacking, but he was denying it publicly. So I had gone, I think the first time I mentioned it was on the Dr. Drew show, and that I confronted him and said that he was hacking. And I know we talked about it on Nightline. So there were some media appearances where I discussed it. And, a lot of people were siding with him and saying, "No, your daughter's just a slut." And she was sending the picture to everybody. And, so nobody really believed he was hacking. And so, it was the victim blaming was huge back then, because, I mean, it wasn't just, law enforcement. It was the media who were glorifying Hunter Moore. It was politicians. It was ordinary people. So people would say, "Oh, I don't care about those victims. That would never happen to me. I would never be in that situation." I mean, that's the kind of thing we were facing. So it was really an uphill battle at that time. And it was before the Me Too movement. So it was just a very different climate in the country.
Yes, it was.
So, but what happened is after all the backlash started against me, like big time, after I posted his address, I got this anonymous, I got a message first on Twitter from someone who claimed to be with the underground group Anonymous. And they're like activists who hack, hacktivists, essentially, like the white, hat guys. And so I ended up having a phone conversation with this guy who said, "Don't worry, we're going to protect you. We're going after him tomorrow. And we're going to dox him," which means putting all his personal information online. And apparently they also got him officially declared dead in California for a month. They sent him like 200 dildos. They did a bunch of different stuff, which is kind of funny. But so they came to the rescue, and Hunter shut up after that. I mean, you didn't hear a peep from him. He was totally afraid of Anonymous. And so they, really held help me out and help the cause out. So, but it was
Wow.
kind of funny, that they just came to the rescue like that. So,
Perfect.
there was
Yeah.
a lot of action going on, that's for sure.
Because of you, because again, I'm going to say Charlotte Laws, because you are relentless and a true warrior. So then what happened? I mean, I don't usually say this, but he looks like such a degenerate to me. It's like he just, for a young person, like what would make somebody be, especially earlier you said, or you think it got back to his mom or family when you were talking to office people from her office. Like, wasn't that enough? A mom maybe saying, don't do this, take it down, you're gonna get in trouble. And so what happened after all this? So he was arrested finally, correct?
Yeah, he was finally
What was he
arrested,
charged
and
with?
it was hacking, and it was like conspiracy to hack, identity theft, that kind of thing. So, and he was originally looking at 42 years in prison, and so was the hacker. And the hacker just wanted to go to jail and get it over with. In fact, CNN was interviewing me at my house, and they called the hacker on the phone, and he confessed on the air on the
Wow.
phone he was doing it. So I was like, and he had been advised by his attorneys not to confess. I mean, he was saying not guilty in court, but he really just wanted to get it over with. So they both got about 2.5 years in prison, but they ended up getting less time than that. And it was really not like a prison, it was more like a summer camp. The place that Hunter went, I know in Texas, was, I believe it was a drug and alcohol rehab. And the
Mm.
so-called prisoners could walk up to the store unsupervised, get what they want, and just come home. So it was not very high security at all, is what I understand.
That
So I
doesn't
think
sound
he
like
did.
any kind of jail I know, or prison. You
Exactly.
know?
So I think he
Oh,
had like maybe 20 months, or it wasn't that long that he was in prison, so to speak. And his mindset hasn't changed. He feels the same way
that's
that
what I
he
wanted
did
to
back
ask
then.
you. Where do we know where he is now? What he's up to? Because you know what I say, Charlotte, once a creep, always a creep. If they're this deep into it, they're up to things because they can't help
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, he's back living with his parents, is what I'm told, although he's trying to pretend that he lives in Miami. But I've had various inside people say he's definitely living at his parents' house outside Sacramento, California. And he did do a couple of very small interviews with just kind of like podcasts, very small podcasts. And he said that the only thing he would do differently is he would jack it up 10 times harder. So I don't know what that means, but that's his comment. He blames everybody but himself. He said it's his attorney's fault, it's the hacker's fault. I'm sure he thinks it's my fault. And he said he has, basically no regrets about it. I mean, he had a good time, and, he just, he wants, he's still a misogynist. He makes racist comments. He makes anti-gay comments because he's still on some social media
But he under
platforms.
his name, he's still on social media under his name
Yeah,
and
he's on
everything.
like he's on like TikTok. I don't know. He's on a couple. I don't go over there and check out what he's
Right.
doing, but this is what people tell me. And there are people who are kind of keeping tabs on what he's doing. He was on Twitter for a short time, but he got kicked off. So he's not on Twitter right now, to my knowledge. But yeah, he's getting a following again. And so they do make these, anti-female, anti-gay, anti-black, he makes these kinds of comments apparently, and so do his followers. So there's a lot of, prejudice and a lot of rough talk. There's no non-consensual pornography to my knowledge, or image-based sexual abuse, but I think there may be some self-submits. There may be some nude pictures of
Right.
people who say, hey, this is my nude picture, which is, obviously consensual, so I don't have a problem with that. But
Right.
so that's really all I know about him. I mean, he blocked me when he got back on Twitter, which I thought was funny because he obviously must, I don't know, I don't really care what he's doing, but maybe he thought I did care. I
But
don't
I
know.
bet you somewhere in that demented mind of his, Charlotte, he's afraid of you. Somewhere in that demented brain, he's
I
afraid of
don't
you.
think he was ever afraid of me. He was afraid of Anonymous, and he was afraid of the
But
FBI, but I
that's
really,
why I'm saying, but you brought them to the table. Therefore, you're to be applauded, kind of thing. Now, let me ask you a
well, thank
question about how is Kayla doing? Because I work a lot with victims, survivors. It's a lifelong trauma for
you. Yeah.
for a lot of people. It's not, some people think that, oh, okay, a picture's down, it's done, it's over, it's 10 years ago. No, it's a lifelong trauma. So how is she doing today? And
I mean,
how,
you have to, yeah, you have to keep a Google alert on your name for the rest of your life,
Mhm.
because you have no idea if that picture is going to come back up, because you don't know who saved it back then. You don't know if it's going to pop up. So you're constantly having to check every time your name shows up. You have to see what it is. And there have been people that are pretending to have Kayla's pictures. There's some girl, I don't know who she is, and they're saying it's my daughter. And there are all these nude pictures. My daughter had one topless picture, but these are like a sequence of nude pictures. And they're saying, oh, we've got Kayla Laws's pictures. And you go on, it's not my daughter, but people might not know because they don't
right.
really know my daughter. I mean, I don't even think they look that much alike, but people wouldn't necessarily know. So, you can still kind of be harassed with it, even when you don't have your picture up
Very,
there,
very stressful, very, yeah.
Yes, but she is doing better. She originally wasn't going to be in the docuseries,
Mhm.
and she only decided the very last day of filming. And she said, "Okay, I'll do a half a day." And because she just, she was always so embarrassed about the whole thing, and she felt like it was going to hurt her career. She's a
Yeah.
successful real estate agent now, and she had this belief that her clients would find out that she had a nude or topless picture and not want to work with her. And so it brings her to tears and traumatizes her, and so she just kind of wanted to distance herself. But lately she's starting to embrace it more, and she got married like 2 or 3 months ago, so
Right.
that's very exciting, and so she's doing quite well. She's doing very well.
Perfect. Now, what did Netflix come to you? Did you go out and pitch this and say we have to get this out there? If you want to discuss it or not discuss it, it's up to you. Because I
No,
think
that's fine. No, I had,
I'm directing
yeah.
everybody to watch this because, and again, we'll get into that because this was 10 years ago, right? And
Yeah,
I'm always
yeah, they did a
encouraging it.
great job. Yeah,
Although I
yeah,
was disappointed, but they put something at the end like Hunter Moore wouldn't participate or something, or he was asked to participate because I was waiting maybe at the end, but he did go to jail. So a lawyer would probably advise him don't participate in anything. But I want everybody to see this now and to see what happened, a
yeah.
decade ago and how hard it's been on you. I mean, you must have been frightened thinking somebody could, I don't know, hide outside your windows or do something to your car or something to that effect, knowing he had this
Yeah,
cult
no, we
like.
had a stalker. We had a stalker come to the house, and
How
this
do,
is
how do
when
you
all this is
know? How
after
do you know it was a stalker? Like you saw a person like
Oh,
looking in the
I
windows or
had
something?
a guy sitting in a white car on the 2 nights in a row. And this is right after I had posted his address. It was right when all that stuff was really going crazy. And my daughter saw this guy sitting out there the night before. And we're on a cul-de-sac. There's like never any cars on our street,
Oh.
right? And
Hmm.
so my daughter saw it, and she didn't say anything to me. And I had been warned by the computer technician who came to get the viruses off my computer. He said, be leery of any cars or vans on your street, because unless they're really sophisticated, that a hacker would need to be near your house to get into your network. And so he actually warned me of that, but I never told my daughter. So when she said to me later, she said, "Oh, why was there a guy in a white car sitting outside?" I couldn't say, "Oh, well, you're just paranoid," or, I was like, "Oh, really?" And then this guy showed up again, like the next night. And I mean, I was so fed up at this point. So I just marched out there. My daughter was running behind me going, "Mom, what are you going to do? Mom, what are you going to do?" And I like march up to this car, and it's this kid in his 20s, blonde curly hair. He's sitting there. He's doing something in his lap. And I said, "May I help you?" And he looks at me. He freaks. He zooms away. He almost hits the neighbor's wall trying to get away. And I just think that he had bad intentions, because if he had good intentions, he would have said, "Oh, I'm waiting for your neighbor," or, he wouldn't have like
Right.
freaked out and zoomed away. So I do think he was a stalker, or he was up to bad,
Up to bat.
he
Of
had bad.
course he was on the cul-de-sac. Why else would he be there? And
Exactly. So I got locks. I went and bought locks for the gates, and we slept with the metal rods under our beds, because Kayla was living at home at that point,
Mhm.
so she was actually living there with me.
Wow.
And but you also asked about how this came to be, and I had been approached by lots and lots of different, maybe as many as 20 different production companies, and wanting to make this into some kind of movie or something, all the way back to like maybe like 7 or 8 years ago. And finally, and nothing ever happened with it. It just never seemed quite right and didn't really work out. And the main problem was too is that Caleb was not willing to be in it. And so a lot of these companies
Right.
were saying, well, if Kayla's not in it, we don't want to do it. So that was part of the issue. And then Raw TV came to me, more recently, within 3 years ago or so, or maybe less, and said, we don't care if Kayla's in it or not. That's fine. And so we
You're like,
proceeded.
sign me up, sign me up.
And
Right.
because it's an important issue. I thought, this is great, we're going to get it out there. And the main thing I wanted to do, which is to push for federal legislation, and I thought maybe this will push things in that direction. And plus, Raw TV is a great company, and Netflix is an excellent network, and so I felt like the whole thing would be very well done. And so they were very happy at the last minute when Kayla agreed to be in it, because she, as I said, wasn't going to be in it at all. And I'm glad that Hunter Moore didn't want to be in it, because they weren't even going to, I don't even know if we would have been in it at all. It was going to be all about Hunter Moore. It was going to be, giving him a microphone, him the ability to repent if he wanted to, which he
Right.
didn't want to do, but they didn't know that, And so the fact that he bowed out, they had to change direction and say, oh, okay, let's make it about this family who,
Better. Yeah.
let's
So much
tell their
better.
story. Yeah, because all these, it's like so many of these crime stories they glorify the criminal. The criminal is the headline. The criminal is, oh, let's talk about the criminal and all the things they did. And then the people who are abused by that criminal don't really get as much of a voice. And I think our show was done in a way that the people who, the victims had a microphone. We really got our message out there.
Yes, I
And the
agree.
criminal wasn't glorified. And so I thought they did an excellent job on the production, and I'm very pleased with the outcome of the project.
Good. I agree with that. Now let's talk about some legislation. Did you try to get something done? And then we're going to go into what's happening today. We have something called the Protect Act that we want to work on about all of this revenge porn or image-based sexual abuse, which is now what everybody's calling it. At least the legislators are calling that, calling it, but we know it is revenge porn. So what did you do after this? You went where?
Well, I started, the first place that we passed a law was California. And as I said, legislators were not very, they were not on the victim side initially. But Senator Anthony Cannella in Northern California wanted to bring forth a law in our state, and he kind of signed me on to help him with that. So I did a lot of speaking to the legislature up there, and it was really tough because they didn't want something, and we were always fighting the ACLU. The ACLU has been against all of these laws because they say it's a breach of free speech and there should be no laws against revenge porn, is essentially what they say. And then we also had the other stumbling block that we have so many people in prison in California that the legislature didn't want additional laws that put people in prison. And so it was something called realignment that we call it in our state, where they want to get people out and not in. So therefore, they were not willing to consider it as a felony. They were only willing to make the law a misdemeanor. And we were trying to get it to be a wobbler, which means it could be a misdemeanor or a felony, depending on what the judge decided. But we did not succeed in that. And we were able to get a law passed. It was very weak, but then we came back the next year and got a stronger law passed. And so we do have a law in California. And then I just kind of started reaching out and lobbying and just helping legislators in different states to try to get, laws passed in their states, as well as, lobbying on behalf of Jackie Spear and other people for a federal law. And she had a law that she was had recently put, it's been out, I guess, for at least a year or so, called the SHIELD Act, which has not passed. And we again have had the ACLU has been fighting it. We also have certain members of the progressive side of the Democratic Party who have been fighting it because, again, they don't want more people in prison. They're trying to get people out of jail. So they don't want laws that are going to put people in jail. And then there was also some other group called Federal Defenders, is what I was told by her office. I don't even know who they are, but she says that this group believes that somehow minorities are more negatively impacted if laws are put in place against revenge porn. I have no idea why, because my experience has been that the perpetrators are almost always young white males,
Yes.
and the victims are almost always young white females, or at least females, white females. So I'm not quite sure where they're getting that minority information, because I've never seen a study that says anything like that. So, so yeah, it was an uphill battle. And, as we now have laws in 48 states, and I did talk to the legislator in Massachusetts. There are 2 states that don't have laws, Massachusetts and South Carolina. And I talked to the legislator maybe a month ago, who brought forth the Massachusetts law, and it did pass their House or their assembly or whatever, but it still hasn't gone through the Senate yet, even though there are a bunch of articles that erroneously say the Senate shot it down. He said that's not true. Those articles are wrong. He said that the Senate still needs to vote on it, and he is confident that it will pass, and he thinks it will pass by the end of the year, is what he told me.
Okay, good.
South Carolina, it failed in South Carolina. And I talked to the legislator's office. It was actually a state senator in South Carolina. And they said that they don't know if he has any plans to bring it forward again. And there's nothing, on the horizon that they see. So South Carolina doesn't have anything right now at all. And then we have the PROTECT Act, which you were mentioning. And as you know, that was brought out by a senator in Utah, Mike Lee. Has announced it, and he was just reelected, so he will be around to continue to work on that. And so, and I would like to see something put in place. And when I read the details of this law, it's funny because it's very similar to USC 18-2257, which was a law that covered the porn industry for 30 years. And essentially what it says is that you have to have a consent form on file, and you have to have an ID for anybody who's depicted nude. And so I had been pushing this idea, funny enough, 10 years ago when I was meeting with different legislators, because I was meeting with, Adam Schiff, and I was meeting with lots of people, Barbara Boxer's office, and on and on. And, but people were, they were not open to the idea of a federal law back then. And so it was getting rejected. But the porn industry is very upset about revenge porn. It, gives them a bad name. It hurts their bottom line. And they were angry that they had to comply with these strict indexing regulations, whereas revenge porn was just cowboy, willy-nilly doing whatever they want. So there was a lawsuit. It went to some judge in 2018, and the judge basically told the porn industry, you don't have to do it anymore. So, and a big argument was, well, revenge porn isn't doing anything, so why should the porn industry have to jump through all these hoops to comply with this very, very difficult law in their view? So, so now we're bringing out something that would cover, revenge porn in a very similar way. And I think, it's very common sense idea to say you have to have a consent form. You have to have, an ID, which also helps you to know that the person's not a minor, which is the reason why the porn industry had to have that identification on file. And there's even a similarity to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, in that in this new law, the website has to take the content down within 72 hours. So that's the same time period that the copyright law has in their, written in their act as well. So I'm hoping that, we can make something of this, and I'm certainly happy.
No, we will. We will. And you must be in on this. You must be part of this. You're a
I mean, I signed the petition, and I'm certainly willing to help in any way I can.
Here's what we're going to plan coming in the new year. Once they're back in session, that what we really need to do is have a day on Capitol Hill. So we invite everybody and their staff, come and hear. And that's what we really have to do next, to get more bipartisan support, more overall support, right? People don't, and you probably know this, Charlotte. I've been in DC, and they're running out to vote, and they'll say to their aide, which way am I going? Which way do I vote? Like they don't even know the issue. So I know when I first was spending a lot of time in Washington, I was shocked about it. But so, educating the legislative aides as well. We want to do a full push. We can start even with a Zoom education for staff, and then actually have a day on Capitol Hill. That's what it actually takes, an in-person. And of course, you throw in the coffee and the snacks, and they show up. And and that's going to be the next step. Those are the next 2 steps, because again, it sounds so simple, but raising awareness, education, and getting a law passed. Now, with all this being said, something we at the Warriors are fighting constantly, as well as many other people, the whole argument goes way back to Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, 1996. So we're pushing to update that. Of course, if I had my way, I would just abolish that whole thing, because this is why people like Hunter Moore fast forward everything going on online, this criminal activity on every single platform, Twitter, Facebook, every app, chat site. They're getting away with it because everybody pretty much right now, legally, their argument is Section 230, where they're just a billboard. They're just, the big, the Google and Facebook, and they're just a billboard. They can't be held responsible. We have to go after them for accountability. So we're working on all of that. And I think this is such a timely 10 years fast forward. The problem we have now also is just in 10 years, Charlotte, so many images are of children. And this, we cannot have any of that. Like, anything against a minor is
Right.
against the law. So we have all
Right.
this going on, and we have to have a day on Capitol Hill. We have to have the media there. We have to educate the legislators. We have to have your voice. Maybe Kayla's, I don't know if she'll ever want to, speak like that. And our other, friends that have been through this, because actually, since you were on my radio program, I had 3 different people reach out to me and say things like this happened to them. So,
Oh, wow.
right. Can you imagine the numbers? People just, like you said, don't come forward, don't talk about it.
Right.
So we're going to keep an eye on the Protect Act. You're definitely going to be a part of that. We need you. I know you're going to agree to help us with all of that. And I want to, for a couple of minutes, get into, if you want, a little bit about you, because you're also a wonderful author, a wonderful storyteller. And again, I think this whole investigation that you're responsible for all of this, Hunter Moore, and the most hated man on the internet, everybody right now on Netflix, getting him taken, away for a little bit, what we hope forever, really prepared you, because you've done, I can't believe everything you've done, from cab driver, city commissioner, sidekick, I don't know, Elvis impersonator, you were the side, I mean, if you want to talk about it a little bit, it's just fascinating. Now, why? Do you get bored, Charlotte, like with a job and jump to the next? What's going on with you? Actress, talk show host, news pundit. Tell us about you a little bit.
Yeah, well, I kind of like having different experiences and kind of
And you
looking at
certainly
the
have,
different.
yeah.
Yeah, and I like to write about things from an experiential point of view. So I feel like kind of when I do something, I'm kind of learning about it. But yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting, doing all these different professions. And I grew up in Atlanta. I was adopted at birth, and I grew up in a really horrible, abusive family. My father was verbally abusive,
Sorry.
and my mom committed suicide. She
No.
didn't actually succeed initially. She ended up being like semi-conscious for 10 years. So she was, kind of like partially brain dead, but she could move like only half of her body, and she slurred her words when she talked, and she didn't have a lot of memory of the past. And then my brother was killed 2 years after my mom did that. He was killed in a car accident.
Oh my
But
goodness,
my
I'm sorry.
father, my father was, the day that my mom cut her wrists and took pills and cut her neck, he said she was taken off to the hospital. And he said, "You were never to mention your mother's name in this house again, and you're never to visit her." And then he immediately filed for divorce, and he never went to visit her. And my brother was 14, and he was closer to my mom than I was. I was never close to my parents, and I always felt like, completely like the black sheep, not only of the family, but of the entire community. So I wasn't emotionally attached like he was, but he was really devastated, and he hated our father. And I had to sneak him to the convalescent home when my mom ended up there. I had to sneak him to visit her because he couldn't drive. And so we had to do that behind my dad's back. And it was funny because my mom had always told me as a little kid, she said, "You're so sneaky." She used to say that to me. And lucky for her, she was right, because that's the only way she had any visitors at all. at the convalescent home. And so I just wanted to escape from the community. I was called an N lover all the time because I supported the civil rights movement, and most of my friends didn't. It was a very racist, upscale community. I was a debutante. And so I just really rejected that whole environment that I was
You were
growing
a
up in.
warrior. You were a warrior your whole life.
And I really believe genetics are very strong. I believe that a lot of this came from my birth family, who I ended up tracking down in my 20s. And, but I didn't feel that I had a family. So I kind of, originally, I went to a great school. I went to a private school, and the teachers were really, they were great teachers, and they, they were like parents to me. So they were substitute parents for me, and I go to their houses. I mean, it was like, and so that it started with that. And then I learned about the entertainment industry, and because I saw them on TV and I saw how unprejudiced they were, how open-minded, and I loved their flashy clothes. And so I became drawn to that. And then I started making the entertainment industry kind of my family. And I started crashing events to meet people and to,
Right, you're a party crasher. I forgot about that. I read that about you.
So that's kind of how it all started.
What did you do,
And then
Charlotte? You just went and like walked in all dressed up and nobody stopped you? Is that what happened?
It completely depended. There are lots of different ways to crash. I wrote a book about it in my 20s. And that was my first book. And and it was like a how-to book, how to, get into various events. And there are lots of techniques. And then I would tell different stories, of things that I did. And and so, at the time it was kind of fun. It was, it was great when I was 17, 18, 19. But as I got older, I realized, hey, I can go to $100,000 per person fundraiser for a senator and crash and lobby for some kind of legislation, or I can get celebrity interviews at the Grammys, and I can go from person to person and interview 20 people at one time, which is a heck of a lot easier than setting up interviews with a publicist, one after the other. Or, there were a lot of things I could do. I could, get people signed on to a cause, or I used to sell like design beaded clothes. I could sell my beaded clothes to some of the wealthy people at some of these events. And, if you get caught party crashing, it is an infraction. It's like a parking ticket. The worst they can do for the first offense, $75. That's it. So it's like you're looking like 100,000 versus $75 if I get caught. Not a hard decision. And any ensuing time, if you were to get caught, is a $250 ticket. It's an infraction. It's not even a misdemeanor. So it's like it's kind of a no-brainer type of thing. And the main people who crash are people who are celebrities or media people. I mean, all the time they do it. It's regular people who are like afraid and don't do it. So there are a lot of benefits to it, because you hobnob with all these people. You have access to people that you would never have access to. And, that can be a big benefit, as I said, for legislation, for causes, for lots of different things.
Wow. Leave us, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up? Anything you want to share? What does the future hold for you? Do you know, other than you're going to be working on the Protect Act with us?
Yes.
What's going on?
Just working on books, and I have a couple books, and then I wrote a screenplay recently, and just various projects that I'm working on. And I would probably say to people that persistence is the key to success, and other centrism, or helping others causes, is the key to happiness. And I think, when you give your heart to various causes and you help others who are in need, whether it's humans or non-humans, then that is the way for your own happiness to be ensured when you're helping others. And so I do a lot of animal advocacy and a lot of things to help non-human, animals as well as humans.
And I love animal, therapy, all of that. It's funny. I had a guest this past week on the radio program. She's a ventriloquist, and she's written a good children's book now about big tech and marketing, owning our kids. They're the currency now online, and that's what the marketers look for. And but in doing the research and talking to her, I was fascinated that she's a ventriloquist. She used to be a puppet with Mr. Rogers. She was the puppet master, I guess that's the name, for Audrey Duck. And what she did is, and she does a lot of work, Boston Children's Hospital. It's like the animal therapy. She uses the puppets, gets the kids talking and happy. She was telling me all during the pandemic when everybody was closed in, locked down, whatever you want to call all that craziness. She was doing all these videos online for kids, because she truly believes in, and she's a psychologist and creative play. We have to get back to that. And it just was, fascinating. And the same thing, we have to get our kids more involved with animals on any level. So I'm working on that as well, bringing people into that. But a lot of the, women I work with, girls I work with, men and boys too, the animal, a dog or a cat makes them so happy when they've been through so much, and you bring that into it. So I like anything we can help people. And your journey, Charlotte Laws, I don't know how you've done it all with your background. Thank you for sharing your story with us, your personal story about your childhood. That is traumatizing, but somehow, like you said, it must be in your genetics for you to be this wonderful warrior. So I want to remind everybody that The Most Hated Man on the Internet, streaming now, 3-part docuseries, a must. I watched it all in one sitting. You will see this Hunter Moore being taken down by right here, Charlotte Laws. And the best place, because there's so much information about Charlotte, go to charlottelaws.com. She's on Twitter, Instagram, she's all over the place. And Charlotte, we want to thank you for spending time with us today. And I look forward to working with you on the Protect Act and all else in the future. Thank you, Charlotte Laws.
Thank you for having me.